Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the foundations of American liberty by exploring the Academy Godly Learners series. This curriculum takes a really unique look at early U.S. history. It dives into how unpredictable events, revolutionary ideas, and deep-seated beliefs actually shaped an entirely new nation. So let's get right into it and look closely at the earliest permanent English settlements. But before we start pinning dates on a historical timeline, this curriculum grounds its whole approach in Proverbs 1:5. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. You see, studying history isn't just about memorizing a bunch of old dates. It's specifically designed to help you become what they call a godly learner. It's all about turning those historical facts into actionable, everyday wisdom. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Eras of early U.S. history. 2. Two essential dates to know. 3. Thinking like a historian. 4. History and biblical wisdom. And 5. Education, morality, and peace. Starting with Section 1, Eras of Early U.S. History. Let's look at the big picture. History isn't just one long, blurry timeline of random events. Historians actually group things into distinct eras to help us make sense of change over time. We kick things off with colonization, move right into the fiery revolution, build a brand new government with the Constitution, and then push across the entire continent with westward expansion. From there, we see the nation fracture during sectionalism and the Civil War, and finally try to rebuild during Reconstruction. Grouping history this way is super helpful because it reveals these massive patterns. You can literally see how early arguments over something like taxation eventually exploded into a full-blown fight for independence. Moving to Section 2, Two Essential Dates to Know. We're zooming in on 1607 and 1620. These two dates, they represent completely different starting lines for America. Picture 1607. The English found Jamestown, and it was a brutal, desperate struggle against disease, conflict, and starvation. But their sheer survival became the economic model for later colonies. Then, just 13 years later in 1620, the Pilgrims arrive at Plymouth. But here's the kicker. Before they even stepped off their ship, they signed the Mayflower Compact. So while Jamestown laid the groundwork for economic expansion, Plymouth laid the absolute groundwork for self-governance in the political traditions we still rely on today. When you sequence these events, a much larger narrative just unfolds right in front of you. You can visually see how incredibly close Jamestown and Plymouth are in time, and how they jointly planted the seeds of American liberty. The permanence they established in 1607, combined with that brilliant self-government of 1620, evolved over decades, and it all eventually culminated in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Tracking how these ideas evolve? Well, that is exactly what it means to think like a historian. All right, Section 3, Thinking like a Historian. Let's examine causation and claims. So, what does that actually look like? A crucial skill emphasized in this course is grasping causation. Basically, that means explaining why events happen and what results from them. History is definitely not a random series of events. It's like a giant puzzle. It's a massive chain of cause and effect where one single decision inevitably forces the next one to happen. We can see this causation in action with Jamestown's survival. Let's break it down. Step 1, the cause. Those early colonists were facing terribly high mortality rates, and they desperately needed an economic base to stay afloat. Step 2, they started cultivating tobacco, which, as it turns out, was highly profitable. And Step 3, the effect. This sudden economic stability brought in investment, grew the population, and made long-term settlement actually viable. Their initial desperate need to just survive ultimately resulted in a permanent foothold in the New World. Now, thinking like a historian also means making strong claims and backing them up with solid evidence. If you claim that colonial political ideas began early, well, you need proof. The evidence here is the 1620 signing of the Mayflower Compact. And the connection? That compact proves the settlers were organizing themselves under rules they explicitly consented to follow, rather than just sitting around waiting for a king's decree. Combining a specific date with a primary source to prove a broader tradition is absolutely the bedrock of historical analysis. Which brings us to Section 4, History and Biblical Wisdom. Let's look at the moral application. Drawing again from Proverbs 1:5, the curriculum points out something really powerful. A wise person learns from both the successes and the failures of the past. So rather than just cramming dates into your head for a test, the material challenges you to ask, what can I learn from this? How do these historical events actually model truth, fairness, and responsibility? Jamestown and the Mayflower Compact are basically perfect case studies for this. They demonstrate clearly that for any community to thrive, it absolutely requires leadership, cooperation, and agreed-upon rules. Looking at it from a biblical morality perspective, the course prompts us to evaluate these early settlers. We have to ask, did their use of power reflect justice? Did they actually show humility and care for their neighbors? Because history is constantly throwing these tough moral questions our way about the leaders who came before us. Sometimes they acted with incredible bravery and wisdom, but other times they profoundly failed to respect human dignity. By critically listening to their stories, we can pull out vital lessons from both their greatest triumphs and their deepest moral failures. So, the core question this curriculum is really posing to you is this: how does knowing about the brutal struggles of Jamestown or the early self-government of Plymouth make you wiser today? The goal isn't just retaining facts, it's using the lens of history to become much more thoughtful about how our own daily choices impact our communities right now. And finally, Section 5, Education, Morality, and Peace. The ultimate goal. At the very heart of the Heroesmart Academy Godly Learners series is this specific philosophy: education without morality will actually hurt you. It's a bold claim, but the curriculum argues that simply being smart or memorizing a timeline is pretty much useless if that knowledge isn't guided by a strong moral compass. Without it, you're bound to make choices that hurt yourself or the people around you. The explainer wraps up by drawing on the book of Romans, which tells us that a mind governed by the Spirit leads to life and peace. The ultimate takeaway here is that by evaluating the moral choices of early Americans through a spiritual lens, you don't just become a better historian, you cultivate real peace of mind. So as we close out today's explainer on the foundations of American liberty, I want to leave you with one final thought. Are we simply memorizing our past, or are we actively using its harshest lessons to build wiser, more just communities today?